As much as I love living in Paris, just like any other big city, it's not perfect. And in this video, I'm gonna share with you the things that I do not like about living in Paris. Right up at the top of my list is the fact that Paris is extremely crowded. As I mentioned in my previous video, Paris is a small city, but it's also a very dense city in terms of population. It's also the most visited city in the world. I think a few years ago, 50 million tourists were recorded to have visited Paris in that year alone. And so even if the residential areas are totally fine, not super crowded like the kind of place that I'm in right now, if you go to the central parts of the city, it can feel a bit overwhelming sometimes, especially if you go on the weekend or during school holidays or so on and so forth. Not gonna lie, when I moved here from India, I was naive enough to think that I'm moving to the west and so it's gonna be less crowded here. But I guess the thing that I didn't really realize about Paris before moving here is that the population density of the city is actually higher than that of places like Bangalore and Delhi. Paris has 19,000 people per square kilometer and Delhi has 11,000 and Bangalore has 12,000, something like that. So even though Paris has fewer people than those cities, it just feels way more crowded than them. It's also one of the reasons why I actually stopped using the metro as much and I just bike everywhere now, because the metro, especially in peak times, gets super crowded. And that actually brings me to my next point, which is that as a result of this, personal space comes at a premium when you're outside at cafes and restaurants. It's not at all uncommon when you're sitting at a restaurant that you're completely packed with everyone else. The next table is literally less than a meter away from you. And if you have the bad luck of being sat next to people that are talking really loudly, it can sometimes even be hard to have a conversation with the people that you're sitting with. Personally, I'm someone that gets overstimulated really easily, and that's something that I've had a lot of difficulty dealing with. And so now, after living here for a while, I sort of know a few cafes and restaurants that I can go to where I know that I'm not going to be completely overwhelmed by all the people there. But I've always had this issue where if I'm hanging out with someone after a really long time and we really want to catch up, essentially I want to have a conversation, it's a bit hard to actually find cafes where I can go and do that, especially over the weekend. So yeah, if you live in Paris and if you have any recommendations for cafes, restaurants that are a little bit more quiet, please let me know in the comments below. Alright, the next thing that I absolutely do not like about living in Paris is the sheer number of sirens that I hear every single time I step outside in the city. I mean, look, it's normal for a big city to have lots of police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, driving around at any given time of the day. But I really think that in Paris, it's a little bit excessive. I feel like when I'm walking around in the central parts of the city, especially like the parts near the river, every single hour I would hear at least 3 or 4 separate times a bunch of sirens going around. It really sometimes feels excessive and it feels a little bit like I'm in a war zone or like something really bad is going on. So yeah, that can sometimes feel a little bit overstimulating for me, especially when I'm just walking around trying to relax myself a little bit, constantly having like a pee-oh. It's really not the most comfortable feeling. If I'm not wrong, I feel like in the last few years, they've really tried to curb down on these sirens. So now I actually feel like some of the sirens are lower volume. So police cars drive by, but they just have a siren on at a lower volume. So that helps a little bit. But overall, I just think that when I compare with other cities like London, for instance, I just don't hear as many sirens as I do in Paris. Even New York, I just feel like every other city I've been in, I just don't hear sirens as frequently as I do in Paris. So I think that for me is like a really big annoying part about living in the city. Related to sirens is just the noise pollution in general in the city. Again, Paris is a small city and it's very, very concrete and built up. The streets are super narrow, and so any sound that occurs inside of a street is going to reverberate and, travel a really long distance. And you just have a cacophony of sounds at any given time. So the sirens, as I just mentioned previously, there's a lot of those. There's like scooters that make a really loud sound while driving. I think for me, those are like the 2 main culprits. And then of course, there's like cars. But really, I think cars are not as noisy as like the sirens and the scooters. So yeah, small streets, concrete, lots of sirens and scooters. It can be a bit noisy. Okay, before I go over to the next 2 points in this video, I just want to say that I actually do love living in Paris. I'm making a video about the things that I don't like. And so I don't want this video to sort of feel like I'm complaining about Paris, the entire way. It's just because the video is meant to describe some of the things that I don't like about living in the city. There's plenty of things that I do like about living here. So yeah, moving on. The next thing that I don't like about living in Paris is the fact that Paris can be really smelly. So firstly, it's no secret, everyone says it, that Paris smells a little bit like pee. Like there's just lots of parts of the city that smell like piss. It's not a very pleasant smell. It's not everywhere, but it's in a lot of places in the city. So yeah, that's not really nice. And then the second thing that makes Paris really smelly is the cigarette smoke. This is actually something that I sometimes tell myself, that one of the reasons I left India was because I really did not like the quality of air in most of the big cities in India. And even though the air quality in Paris overall is way better, when I'm just sitting at a terrace outside at a restaurant, or when I'm just walking on the street, even one single person smoking a cigarette can basically just like spoil the entire air quality for that area. And that's something that happens quite a lot, and it's something that really annoys me. But there aren't really that many rules about public smoking in Paris, because I think smoking is just something that's really inbuilt into French culture so much that they can't really ban smoking in public places. I mean, I really think they should, but I don't think they will. But yeah, that's just the second thing that contributes to Paris being a little bit smelly. So I think piss and cigarettes, that's what I would describe as what makes Paris a bit smelly. All right, the next thing that I don't like so much about living in Paris is the weather. So Paris weather can be a little bit extreme. It's like uncomfortable on both ends. Like it can be uncomfortably cold in the winter. It can be uncomfortably hot in the summer. So it can be a little bit extreme that way. I mean, I know that there's places in the world that are more extreme than that. But yeah, for me anyway, coming from a place like Bangalore where the weather is like pretty stable throughout the year, more or less, yeah, Paris can be a little bit more extreme. The other thing about Paris weather is that it can vary a lot in the course of the month and even in the course of a week. So you can have, for example, 2 days that are really warm, really nice, pleasant, and then suddenly it's going to start raining, get kind of cold. And it's often happened, especially in like the spring and the autumn seasons, where like I step out of my apartment thinking that, oh yeah, it's going to be a nice warm day, and suddenly it's actually cold and rainy. Oh well, and I'm not prepared for it. And it can also happen the other way around, where I think it's going to be like, oh, it's going to be cold and cloudy, and actually no, it's pretty sunny and I'm feeling hot now. So yeah, I think the variability of Paris weather is yeah, it's not really the most comfortable or most predictable. Also, one really interesting thing about Paris weather is that the winters are humid. It's weird. I actually see that in the wintertime, humidity levels outside sometimes are 85, 90%, sometimes even 100%. And when you combine that with the fact that most buildings in Paris are really old, it can lead to mold issues, which are not the most comfortable to deal with. So yeah, that's another thing that I don't really like that much about living in Paris. Honestly, when I look back at all the points that I just said, I feel like these could apply to the vast majority of like major cities in the Western world, except probably the issue of the sirens. I'm really convinced that's unique to Paris. But those are just some of the things that I don't like about living in Paris. Again, prefacing that there's a lot of things that I love about living here. That's why I continue to live here and I have no plans to move. But yeah, these are just some of the things that I don't actually like that much. Let me know what you think. Have you visited Paris or do you live in Paris? And what do you think? What are some of the things that you don't like about living in Paris that I haven't already covered in this list? Let me know in the comments below. And until then, see you guys in the next video.